She was humiliated for being poor, but what happened in the end left everyone in shock. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments so we can feel connected through these stories. And if you're into emotional love stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you help our channel grow and never miss a single chapter of the intense dramas we've prepared for you. The sky over Charleston was brushed in golden and pink tones as the sun set behind the elegant mansions of the historic southern city. On that muggy spring evening, the Marlowe family's garden, one of the most traditional families in the region, was filled with high society guests, men in tailored suits, women in silk dresses and pearl necklaces, champagne glasses in hand. The background music was classical and discreet, played by a string quartet under a gazebo lit with soft lights. Claire Whitmore moved through the groups of guests with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her chin slightly raised and her eyes alert. She was 26, very fair-skinned and delicate, with ash-blonde hair tied in a simple ponytail, no makeup, and wearing the black and white uniform of the catering staff. Beneath the modest appearance, there was a steady glint in her eyes, the kind of spark that forms when someone learns to survive without depending on anyone. Claire had made it there through sheer effort. A full scholarship student at the University of Charleston, she split her days between psychology classes, research assistant shifts, and temp jobs to pay for her small studio apartment on the city outskirts. That event was just another opportunity to earn some extra money. She wasn't part of that world, but she had learned how to move through it with dignity, even when ignored by those around her. While balancing the tray of hors d'oeuvres, her eyes met those of a tall man with broad shoulders and a curious expression. He stood near the magnolia garden, away from the crowd. He wore a light grey blazer with a perfect cut, his dark brown hair slicked back, and his green eyes were locked on her with an unsettling intensity. This was Nathaniel Chambers. Nate, as everyone called him, was 28 and carried the weight of a last name built on real estate wealth and local politics. He was known in the city's social circles, not just for his flawless looks and easy charm, but also for the pressure of being his father's heir in the family real estate empire. That night, though, he seemed bored, out of place, until he saw Claire. "You don't look like you want to be here any more than I do," he said with a crooked smile, not noticing the tray in her hands. Claire paused for a second. It wasn't common for guests to speak to her like that, especially not with that kind of familiarity. "I'm just trying to make it through the night without bumping into someone important," she replied lightly, still professional. He chuckled, intrigued. "Well, if you bump into me, I promise I won't sue." The light joke made them both laugh. Against her better judgment, Claire stopped for a moment. Nate took 2 glasses of wine from the nearby table and offered one to her, assuming she was an unusual guest, maybe shy or just a bit out of place. She hesitated again. "Sorry, you think I'm a guest, aren't you?" he asked, surprised. She smiled, eyes downcast. "No, I work here." Nate was silent for a second, as if mentally rearranging everything he'd assumed. Then he shrugged, sincere. "That explains the sharp look. But it doesn't change the fact that this is the most honest conversation I've had in weeks." Claire felt something rare stir inside her, a mix of nervousness and curiosity. For 30 minutes they talked, while discreetly leaning against one of the mansion's porch columns. She spoke about books, tough classes, how hard she worked just to get by. He listened with unexpected attention, and he shared too, about his father's pressure, the contracts he hated, the emptiness of living a life designed to look perfect. For a moment, it felt like there was no gap between their worlds, until a sharp voice shattered the spell. "Oh, Nate, are you seriously talking to the waitress? How adorable!" The voice came from Charlotte Keller, a senator's daughter and Nate's ex-girlfriend, standing a few steps away with a venomous smile. She wore a red dress that was far too tight for the occasion and held her champagne glass like a trophy. Claire froze. A few people nearby were already looking. Nate didn't answer right away. Charlotte continued, "She's great, isn't she? We just love when the catering staff is well-spoken. Adds a bit of cultural charm to the party." Claire looked down, her face burning. Nate hesitated, then took a step to the side and looked at Claire with a mix of guilt and discomfort. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Claire felt the blow of that sentence like a punch. She didn't say anything. She simply handed her empty tray to one of the catering colleagues and walked away, weaving through the guests who were now whispering with knowing smiles or awkward glances. Behind her, Nate stood frozen. Charlotte took a triumphant sip of her champagne. Claire walked quickly through the back of the garden, her heart tight and her throat burning. She tried to stay composed, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed the shame. The humiliation still echoed in her ears. Charlotte's sarcastic laugh, the sideways stares, the way Nate went silent when confronted. It all hurt more than she wanted to admit. She leaned against the side of the house, near the catering prep kitchen, trying to catch her breath. Inside, the other staff moved around, unaware of the storm she was holding inside. Claire took out her hair tie and took a deep breath. She couldn't cry. Not here. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garden, Charlotte Keller strutted through the guests like she owned the place. Her tight red dress, sparkling jewelry, and high heels clicked firmly on the wooden deck as she animatedly told her own version of the story. "You should have seen her face," she said, a cruel smile on her lips. "Thinks she can serve drinks one night and walk out with an engagement ring the next." Some laughed, others just smiled awkwardly. But among the younger crowd, phones were already out. Someone filmed it. Someone posted it. Minutes later, the video was already circulating on local social media. Claire standing in front of Nate, being confronted by Charlotte, with captions like, "Waitress falls for the air and gets shut down in public." Charleston's elite internet could be cruel, especially to those who dared to step out of their place. Claire didn't know about the video yet. She just tried to pull herself together, return to the main room, and finish her shift with her head held high. But as soon as she crossed the garden again to bring a tray of desserts to the central table, she felt the stares hitting her like needles, stifled giggles, whispers, fingers subtly pointing. She kept walking, trying to ignore it, until Charlotte once again made sure she was heard. What determination, right? Some people really have no shame. Claire stopped. The tray trembled slightly in her hands. She took a deep breath, but just as she turned to walk away, another voice, one that had been far too quiet, finally spoke up. "Charlotte, that's enough." It was Nate. He was walking over with a serious expression, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on his ex-girlfriend. For a brief second, Claire felt her heart jump. Maybe he was finally going to stand up. Maybe he'd say she deserved respect, but Charlotte gave a fake innocent smile. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." Nate hesitated. He looked around. Everyone was watching, people he'd known since childhood. His father's disapproving gaze from afar. Business partners, socialite wives, all waiting for his reaction. He turned to Claire and said, his voice low and restrained, "You should go." She stared at him, stunned. "What?" "Just... You don't have to. Keep working. I'll handle it with the team. You've done enough." It was like a punch to the stomach. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. He wasn't defending her. He was dismissing her, as if she were the problem, as if her very presence there needed to be dealt with. "I see," she said in a faint voice before walking away, this time unable to hide the tremble in her eyes. The tears came silently as she stepped through the garden gate. She walked along the dark sidewalk to her old dented sedan and got in like someone escaping a fire. On her phone screen, the notifications were starting to pop up. She clicked the link, the video, the caption, the comments. So embarrassing. Trying To climb the ladder by sitting on someone's lap. Charleston isn't for just anyone. Claire turned off the screen. She sat there holding her breath, hands on the wheel, with no strength to start the car. But in that silence, something began to shift. The pain wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger. It was outrage. It was the seed of a strength she didn't. Yet know she had. She swallowed hard, wiped her eyes, and for the first time in a long time said to herself, "They don't know me, and they're going to regret that." In the days that followed the scandal, Charleston felt smaller, more suffocating. The same charming, historic streets with their white porches and moss-draped oaks now seemed to watch Claire with judgmental eyes. But she didn't back down. She didn't let shame paralyze her. Quite the opposite. She woke up before the sun, walked to the coffee shop where she worked the morning shift before class, and then spent hours in the university library, buried in books. She wore worn-out jeans, simple blouses, and tied her hair in a tight bun. There was no time for vanity. Every second was an investment in the future she had promised herself that night in the garden. A future where no one would ever call her just a waitress. Across town, in a mansion surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, Nate Chambers watched the storm unfold in silence. The viral video was still making the rounds online, now mixed with sensationalist gossip about the love life of Charleston's most eligible heir. He hadn't seen Claire since that night. He didn't have the courage. Sitting in the house library with the fireplace lit despite the mild spring warmth, Nate stared at a glass of whiskey without touching it. His father walked in without knocking, as he always did. Richard Chambers was a tall man with rigid posture and a controlled voice, the kind who didn't need to raise his voice to intimidate. "You did what you had to do," he said, pulling up a chair. "I humiliated her," Nate replied, without looking up. "You prevented a bigger scandal. That video alone caused enough damage. We don't need headlines saying my son threw away the future of the company for a waitress. She's not just a waitress." His father frowned, crossing his legs with calculated elegance. "Of course not. She's also a scholarship student. From a neighborhood where our cars wouldn't last a single night without being stripped." Nate didn't answer. Anger boiled under his skin, but it was the same feeling as always. Powerlessness. Since childhood, he had been molded to obey, to protect the family name, the inherited empire, the appearances. "You have a legacy to uphold, Nathaniel," Richard continued. "That girl is not part of it." Nate stood and walked over to the window. The sky was clear, and through the glass he saw the world he'd grown up in: golf courses, private clubs, gala parties. Everything looked shiny and empty. "What if I don't want this legacy?" he murmured. His father stepped closer. "Then someone else will, and you'll be left with nothing, not with her, not with this." He tapped his son's chest with one finger. "Think about that before you ruin everything for a fantasy." Meanwhile, Claire was forging her own path, quiet and determined. She refused to be a victim. She shut down all her social media, ignored the whispers at the university, and avoided every social event. One rainy afternoon, after hours working as a receptionist at a dental office, Claire sat in her small rented room in the back of an old house, still in her light blue uniform. She spread books across the bed. In one of them, she marked the page with that week's goal: to submit the first draft of her final project, a social entrepreneurship plan aimed at youth from underserved communities. "They think I'm small," she whispered to herself, "but that's only because they don't know what I'm capable of yet." She closed her eyes for a moment and pictured herself 5 years from now, running her own business, helping others like her break through the invisible barriers society had placed around them. Far from there, Nate was scrolling through his phone. He stopped on an old post from Claire, where she was smiling at a university picnic, sitting on a colorful blanket with a book in her lap. It hit him like a silent blade. He thought about writing. He thought about calling. But he didn't. Fear spoke louder, the weight of his name, his father's stare. And so, day after day, his silence became another wound for Claire, one she never let anyone see. 2 years had passed since the night Claire walked away humiliated in front of Charleston's elite. Time, which so often feels like an enemy, had become her greatest ally. Claire now walked through glass and steel hallways at the top of a modern high-rise downtown. Her confident steps echoed on the polished floor. Her mid-height heels, structured blazer, and carefully straightened hair pinned into an elegant bun created the image of a woman who no longer carried the weight of shame. Her eyes, once hesitant, now reflected focus and command. She was a consultant in people management and organizational development. With a freshly earned psychology degree and training in human-centered leadership, Claire had become a reference among startups and traditional companies seeking to modernize their management models. Her voice was heard, respected, even by men in suits who wouldn't have spoken to her 2 years earlier. That morning, Claire had been hired to restructure the internal culture of a corporation struggling with high turnover and internal leadership crises. The company's name had sounded familiar, but only when the driver turned onto one of Charleston's most luxurious avenues and stopped in front of the blue glass building did her heart begin to race. Above the main entrance, it read, Chambers and Whitmore Group. She hesitated for a second. The name Chambers still weighed on her, but she took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The wind blew a few strands of hair across her face, and she calmly tucked them back. You made it this far, Claire. Now's not the time to back down. She was greeted by a young woman from the HR team who guided her through the building to the meeting room. The office was luxurious and modern, with a panoramic view of the Ashley River. The employees moved quietly, dressed in impeccable clothes. Claire walked among them naturally, as if she had always belonged to that world. As she entered the meeting room, everything about her radiated professionalism. She laid out her materials, opened her laptop, and began presenting her 90-day plan to the executive team. It was only when the door opened and someone walked in late that the atmosphere completely shifted. Nate Chambers stopped in the doorway. His green eyes, once full of charm disguised as arrogance, now carried exhaustion and frustration. He wore a dark suit, his tie slightly crooked, and held a cup of already cold coffee. He looked toward the woman speaking to the team and took a few seconds to recognize her. She paused for a moment but didn't show any surprise. She simply stared back at him, steady. The room, sensing the tension, went quiet for a brief moment. "Mr. Chambers," Claire said with a slight nod, "nice to see you again." Nate blinked, confused. Claire Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore now, she replied calmly. I'm the consultant brought in to lead the restructuring plan for your people and culture department. He stood frozen, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The woman he had seen leave that garden in tears, crushed by cruel words, was now standing there, strong, respected, untouchable. You look different, he murmured, still in disbelief. Yes, she said, turning her gaze back to the other executives, just like your company needs to be if it wants to survive the next few years. Everyone in the room felt the impact. There was no arrogance in her voice, just conviction. Nate slowly sat down, as if he had no other option. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't the one in control of the situation. At the end of the meeting, Claire gathered her materials while the other executives left. Nate remained in the room. Claire, just listen to me for a moment. She stopped but didn't turn around. I came here to do my job, Nate, that's all. I messed up, I know that. All these years I've thought about reaching out. And to you. But I was a coward, and you became someone amazing. Claire took a deep breath, still facing away. I always was. You just didn't have the courage to see it." And she walked out of the room without looking back, leaving him alone with the memory of what he'd lost. Claire's presence in the Chambers and Whitmore building became more and more noticeable and talked about. What at first seemed like just another hired consultant quickly became the center of strategic meetings, the most listened-to voice in important decisions. Her ideas were practical, modern, and she soon earned the trust of the directors and the respect of the employees. The team, once unmotivated, began to respond to the changes with enthusiasm. On the open floor of the 16th floor, where the leadership team met daily, Claire began leading the weekly performance meetings. She sat at the head of the table with perfect posture, attentive eyes, and a confident tone of voice, firm but fair. As she spoke, Nate watched her with a mix of surprise and growing admiration. The woman who, 2 years earlier, had been treated like she didn't exist, was now the central figure in an organizational transformation. And it wasn't just that. She had the respect he had never managed to earn, even with his last name. "We have 3 leaders in the process of voluntary resignation," she said one morning, pointing to the data on the monitor. "The pattern is clear. Toxic environments, authoritarian leadership, and a lack of listening. This company is losing talent because it insists on outdated models." One of the older directors pushed back. "That's always worked here. You want to reinvent everything?" Claire looked at him without fear. "I'm not here to reinvent. I'm here to stop it from sinking." Silence. And then discreetly, Nate smiled. For the first time, not out of charm, but out of pride. After the meeting, he caught up to her in the glass corridor overlooking the harbor. The sun was bright outside, casting their shadows across the white marble floor. "You lead better than anyone I've ever known," he said, trying to bridge the distance between them. "The team's different, more alive." Claire adjusted her bag strap and simply replied, "That's what happens when people are treated like people. I never imagined seeing you here like this," he said, almost confessing. "And at the same time, I think I always knew you were different." She looked at him for a brief moment. "Nate, what are you trying to say?" "I wanted to talk, to say that you had 2 years to say anything," she interrupted, her voice calm. "And when I needed someone the most, you stayed silent." He lowered his eyes. "Now I'm here because I earned it, and I won't let unresolved feelings get in the way of what I'm building." She walked past him without waiting for a response, and once again he stood alone with the weight of what he had let slip away. In the following days, Claire continued leading the change processes with precision. Meetings, trainings, mentoring. Her presence shifted the entire company's atmosphere. Some executives who had resisted her at first were now actively seeking her input. During a presentation on organizational culture, she closed by saying, "Respect can't be bought. It's built, and it takes time. But once it's earned, no one can take it away." Nate, sitting in the back of the room, clapped more slowly than the others, his gaze distant. He was beginning to realize that this time he was the one who needed to catch up. And maybe it was already too late. The rain had started as a light drizzle that afternoon in Charleston, but now it pounded violently against the glass windows of the towering Chambers and Whitmore building. Inside, the air felt heavy, as if every room held its own corporate ghosts. On the 8th floor, Claire was typing the final revisions to the role reorganization plan. Her office was spacious and minimalist, with neutral tones and natural light filtered through white curtains. The scent of fresh coffee still lingered. But that wasn't what unsettled her. It was the silence from the hallway, a dense silence that felt like the prelude to something she had long expected. Then, like a ghost from the past, knocking at the door, a familiar voice came with a soft knock. "Claire, can I come in?" She didn't answer right away. her fingers, paused on the keyboard, and her body stiffened for a moment. She took a deep breath. She wasn't that girl from the party anymore. She wasn't the waitress with teary eyes and a broken spirit. She was the woman who, after everything, had rebuilt her dignity brick by brick. "Come in," she said without emotion, still facing away. Nate walked in slowly. He wore something rare on his face, vulnerability, a navy blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves, looking rumpled like he hadn't slept. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, and his green eyes, once so full of certainty, now avoided hers. "If it's about work, talk to the projects team," she said, slowly turning in her chair. "It's not about work," he replied, his voice quieter than she remembered. "It's about you, about us, about everything." Claire stood calmly, crossing her arms. "Us? You ignored me for 2 years, and now you want to talk about us?" "I hate myself every day for that, Claire. I should have defended you. I should have looked for you. But I was a coward, and ridiculously proud." "No, Nate, you weren't just a coward. You were complicit. You let them humiliate me. You saw me bleed inside and didn't lift a finger. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the spoiled ex-girlfriend, or the laughter, or the viral video. It was your silence. It was you turning your back like I was nothing." He closed his eyes, as if each word were a deserved blow. "I know. I swear I know. I wish I could go back. Redo that night. Tell everyone they were wrong. Tell them you were more than anyone there. But you didn't. And now what? You're going to say you're sorry? Expect me to smile and say, 'It's okay, Nate'? Like I didn't cry alone night after night in my dorm room? Like I didn't wipe down table after table with my head held high, trying to convince myself it was still worth it?" Emotion rose in his throat and his voice trembled. "You're worth more than anyone here. More than me, for sure. You built everything on your own. You are everything I admire and everything I lost because I was my father's puppet." Claire stepped closer, slowly, eyes locked on his. "Does your father still run your life, Nate? Or have you finally started thinking for yourself? That's why I'm here. Because for the first time, I want to do the right thing, even if it costs me everything. And the right thing is asking you for forgiveness, not to win you back, but so you'll know I see you. Finally. And that you've changed how I see the world." She looked at him for several long seconds. There were no tears, not anymore, just a bitter serenity from someone who had learned to heal alone. "Thank you for the apology, but don't expect it to change anything. The pain you left in me doesn't disappear with words. And don't fool yourself, Nate. I'm not the same girl you once knew. I don't need you anymore to know who I am." He nodded, eyes red, murmuring as he turned to leave. "Even so, I'm sorry." When the door closed, Claire allowed herself to sit back down, but not as someone shaken, as someone who had survived her own fire and came out of it stronger. The rain outside grew heavier, but inside her, everything was starting to settle. She didn't want revenge. She wanted respect. And for the first time, she felt like she was getting it from herself. Mr. William Chambers's office overlooked Charleston's financial district, where the glass towers mirrored the ambition of the men who ran them. The space was dark, austere, furnished with mahogany and decorated with corporate self-portraits. Nothing in that room was casual. Everything exuded control. He held a grey folder stamped with Claire's consulting firm logo in the bottom corner. He flipped through its contents with calculating eyes as his secretary quietly closed the door behind her. "Nathaniel," he said into the phone, his voice low, laced with a veiled threat. "We need to talk. Now." Minutes later, Nate stepped into the office, hesitant. His father didn't look up. He just kept studying the papers in silent scrutiny. "Did you know this woman, this consultant, Claire Whitmore, had a history with you years ago?" Nate swallowed hard. "Yes. And that doesn't affect her work." William finally looked up, eyes cold as steel. "It doesn't affect it. She's inside our company with direct access to our systems, contracts, confidential information, and you think that's not relevant? She's not a threat, Dad. Claire is a professional, and what happened between us is in the past. Don't be naive, Nate. You have a weakness, and she's your blind spot. You're blinded by guilt, and it's compromising the Chambers family's judgment. The silence between them felt heavy as lead. Outside, the sky was filled with dark clouds, and a distant thunderclap seemed to echo the storm building within. Those walls. William shut the folder firm. She'll be let go. Early termination. I'm already pulling the right strings to justify it as an internal restructure. No one will connect the dots, but she'll leave through the back door. You're making a mistake. Nate stepped forward, outraged. She's competent. She's made real changes to the company's culture. She's uniting a team that was completely fragmented. Competence doesn't clean up a reputation, William shot back. And this company, Nate, isn't an emotional rehab center. It's an empire, and empires don't bow to old flames. In the days that followed, everything moved with surgical precision. Quiet rumors began to circulate in the hallways that Claire missed deadlines, that her methods were overly emotional, that the promised results had fallen short. The way people looked at her changed. Meetings that used to be lively were now marked by silence and hushed whispers. Claire noticed. It wasn't the first time she had felt the ground collapse beneath her feet, but now the pain wore the mask of corporate politics. On Thursday morning, she was called into an extraordinary meeting with the legal department. When she arrived at the glass-walled room, she found two directors seated, their faces unreadable. One of them opened a folder, speaking in a voice devoid of any empathy. Claire, following a contract review, we've decided to end your consulting engagement early. The official reason is strategic change. You'll be compensated in accordance with Clause 14B. She held her posture. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. I understand. I'd just like to go on record as saying I delivered all the milestones outlined. The team responded to the changes, but I see that some decisions are made outside the meeting room. As she stood up, the directors avoided her gaze. Hours later, the internal memo went out to the entire company. Whitmore Consulting will conclude activities by decision of the board. We thank them for their services. And as expected, venomous whispers began to spread through corporate channels. One post from an anonymous employee suggested Claire had been hired due to personal connections, not merit. Another claimed she couldn't handle the pressure of a real corporation. Alone, in the parking lot at sunset, Claire stared at the Chambers and Whitmore Tower reflected in her windshield. Her phone buzzed, a notification for a new email with the subject line, "Termination confirmed, access revoked." She took a deep breath. There were no tears. There was anger, but a different kind of anger this time. Not one born of helplessness, but of clarity. They had underestimated her again, and once more they tried to erase her through silence and manipulation. But Claire was no longer the same woman who had fallen before. Not this time. If they think they can bury me, it's because they forgot. I'm the root. Rain poured down hard on the streets of Charleston that grey afternoon, the sky threatening to collapse under the same weight Claire carried in her chest. After the public humiliation and the firing that seemed to bury her dreams, she spent days in silence and doubt. But what she didn't know was that the storm about to hit would be much bigger, and she'd have to face it with her head held high. When the doorbell rang at her small apartment, Claire opened the door and found Daniel, a young analyst from the finance department at Chambers and Whitmore. He looked visibly nervous, his hand shaking as he held a folder full of documents. "Claire, I couldn't stay quiet any longer," he said, his voice strained. "I know what I'm about to show you could change everything. It's the truth. They tried to hide. She took the folder with steady hands, even though her heart raced. Inside were detailed reports, altered spreadsheets, contracts with forged signatures, all meticulously manipulated by William Chambers to destroy her. As she flipped through the pages, tears of rage and relief started to well up in her eyes. They wanted to destroy me, but they never imagined someone from their own side would help expose the truth. Daniel lowered his gaze, weighed down by guilt. I saw it all up close. The pressure, the orders to sabotage your work, the lies, to cover up the family's mistakes. You deserve justice, Claire, and I'm going to help you get it. That night, Nate showed up at her apartment unexpectedly. The man who once avoided pain now seemed filled with remorse. Claire, I tried to ignore it, to pretend I didn't see what was happening, he confessed, his voice low but thick with restrained emotion. My father, he taught me to protect the family's image at all costs. But I was wrong. You deserve so much more than humiliation. She looked at him with a mix of pain and hope. Nate, I don't want your pity or your easy forgiveness. I want you to understand how deeply this hurt me, to understand that this fight is bigger than both of us. They decided to act together. As the local media prepared for the week's biggest shock, Nate publicly resigned from his position as the company's vice president, declaring that he would no longer be complicit in his father's corruption and manipulation. The newspaper headline read, Son defies Chambers' empire, reveals scandal of corruption and sabotage. At the press conference, Claire spoke with a steady voice, her eyes glowing with the strength of someone who had won an almost invisible battle. Behind the shine of powerful families, there's a truth that needs to be told. I'm not just a woman who overcame prejudice. I'm a symbol of resistance against the abuse of power. The impact was immediate. William Chambers was removed, investigated, and his reputation was destroyed. Claire's victory also marked the fall of a system she dared to challenge. A few months later, one of the country's top consulting firms made Claire an offer she couldn't refuse, recognition that no one could deny anymore. In her new office, overlooking the city that had seen her grow and suffer, Claire smiled. For the first time in a long while, the pain, the humiliation, and the fight had shaped a stronger woman. They thought they could bury me, she murmured, looking at the golden horizon lit by the setting sun. But I'm the seed that grows after the storm. Claire looked out over the city of Atlanta from her new office, located in a modern building with large glass windows reflecting the twilight sky. The soft spring breeze moved the white curtains as the golden light cast a glow over her face, a face now marked by hard-won strength and serenity. Her blonde grey hair, now cut in an elegant style that highlighted her slender neck, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her blue eyes, once filled with sleepless nights of tears and anguish, were now steady and full of intense light, the light of someone who had conquered her own destiny. She adjusted herself in the leather chair, staring into the distance, a world so different from the one where she had been humiliated, rejected, and underestimated. Every step, every sleepless night studying, every hidden tear had been worth it. The foundation for social inclusion in the corporate world that she now led was a symbol of her resilience and her commitment to those who also suffered from prejudice. The sudden ring of the phone brought her back to reality. The name on the screen lit up her heart with a mix of surprise and apprehension. Nate Chambers. She held the phone with slightly trembling hands, taking a deep breath. "Hello, Nate," she said, her voice steady but heavy with restrained emotion. On the other end, Nate's voice sounded different. No longer the arrogant young man, but a man whose tone carried the humility of someone who had faced his own failures. "Claire, I know everything between us was hard. I left behind the world that suffocated me. I'm living a simple life now, far from my father's shadow, from the wealth and the lies. And I just wanted to say, I admire everything you've accomplished." She felt a lump in her throat, emotion tightening her chest like a storm ready to break. "I never imagined you'd have that kind of courage, Nate. Leaving that golden cage. I'm glad you're searching for something real." His voice cracked for a moment, sincerity pouring from every word. "Claire, I need to apologize. Not just for walking away, but for not standing up for you when you needed it most. I was weak, a coward, and it still eats away at me." She closed her eyes, feeling the past and present crash together with overwhelming force. "I'm not looking for revenge, Nate. I just want honesty. If we're going to try again, let it be with no masks, no secrets." "I want that more than anything," he replied, with a firmness that sparked hope. When the call ended, Claire sat for several minutes, clutching the phone like she was holding not just his voice, but the promise of a different future. Outside, the city sparkled, full of possibilities. She knew that after so much pain, it was possible to rebuild, not just love, but her life. The university auditorium was packed, a sea of young, attentive faces glowing under the golden light of the late afternoon, filtering through the huge windows. The air was thick with anticipation and reverent silence, as if everyone knew this was more than just another lecture. Claire walked forward with steady steps, her navy blue dress perfectly fitted to a body that now radiated confidence and an elegance earned through hardship. Her face, marked by serene beauty, carried soft yet resolute features. Her blue eyes, once shy and full of doubt, now burned with an unbreakable fire, the gaze of someone who had faced inner storms and emerged victorious. She paused at the podium, took a deep breath, and her voice came out calm but full of an intensity that made each word echo through the room. "When people ask me what I've learned most in life, I don't talk about degrees or titles. I've learned about pain. I've learned about humiliation, about nights when all I had was the cold silence of a room, the feeling that no one sees you, that you don't matter. I was that girl who waited tables at parties where I dreamed of being a guest, where I was called by my job, not my name. I was humiliated, ridiculed, forgotten." A heavy silence settled over the room, and a young woman in the front row quietly wiped away tears as Claire continued, her voice now full of restrained emotion, almost a whisper growing in strength. "But I also learned that pain isn't the end of the story, that no matter how many times you fall, true strength lies in getting back up. I forgave Nate not because he deserved my forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. Peace to breathe without fear, to look in the mirror and love who I see, not the girl from the past, but the woman who fights, who chooses herself above any adversity." She glanced toward Nate, sitting in the last row, his green eyes shining with a mix of regret, respect, and hope. He sat with a rigid posture, but it was clear the wall between them was beginning to fall. "You may be born with nothing. You may be judged by your past, your skin color, your family name, or the poverty you carry. I lived all of that. But true success, my friends, doesn't lie in possessions, money, or the power the world tries to give you. It lies in the value you see in yourself, in having the courage to say, 'I deserve this, I can do this, I will make it.'" Claire's voice cracked slightly, a mix of pain and release, before she ended with a glow that drew every eye to her, suspended in her words. "Don't let anyone, not even yourselves, make you feel like you're less. The greatest victory is learning to choose yourself every single day, even when the world keeps trying to knock you down." Applause followed instantly, loud and genuine. The weight of that whole story, all those battles, seemed to lift, replaced by a shared sense of hope and strength. After the talk, Nate slowly stood, his face marked by the vulnerability of someone finally owning his mistakes. He walked toward Claire, each step heavy but certain. "Claire," His voice broke, nearly a whisper full of regret. "Thank you for showing me what true love is, the kind that sets you free and starts from within. You've taught me more than you could ever know." She looked at him, heart aching for everything they'd been through, but now with the serenity only someone who has conquered themselves can feel. "I forgive you, Nate," she said firmly, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And peace doesn't go with resentment. Now we're equals, and that's how we'll move forward, with respect, no masks." They left the auditorium together side by side as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm tones that signaled not just the end of a day, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter written with courage, self-love, and the certainty that a person's worth is never in what the world gives them, but in who they choose to be. So, what did you think of this story? I really want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10 and let me know how much you liked it. If this narrative touched your heart, don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Before you go, I've already lined up another emotional story that will move you even more. Stick around and follow along. There's a lot more emotion ahead.